Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended, and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." Jesus said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Grace and peace to you on this day from God our Father and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. They searched for him for 3 days. It's a long time. For 3 days. And when they found Jesus, he was talking with the teachers who were astounded by his answers and his questions. And his mother said to him, in great anxiety, "Where the heck were you?" And Jesus responded, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Or to put it in a frank way, where else do you think I would be? But right here. Origin stories are important. They're helpful to us because they help us enter the whole narrative and what the storyteller wants us to know about what's happening and who's involved and how we are a part of it. And this story that only Luke tells, is a great origin story of Jesus. And we might misperceive it when Jesus says, "Well, where else would I be but in my Father's house?" Because the whole story doesn't happen there, right? I mean, Jesus doesn't grow up in the temple. Not like Samuel. He doesn't live his adult life in the temple. He doesn't gather his followers in the temple. He doesn't teach in the temple, at least not to the end. He doesn't die in the temple. But where else would he be but the last place that you would look or expect? I think that's what Luke is trying to show us. And his parents didn't quite get that, even though he went home joyfully to listen to them and grow in stature. Origin stories are important. You know how this works. You know origin stories, right? I mean, Peter Parker gets bit by a radioactive spider. That's why he's so strong. That's why he can crawl up the wall. That's why his senses go wacky when something's about to happen and he's in tune with it. And there's that great line from Spider-Man that, with great power comes great responsibility. That's what that story is about. Everything that happens to Spider-Man is that relationship. Or you know this, that Dr. Bruce Banner was infected by gamma rays, whatever that means. And when he gets angry, he turns into a big green monster. Don't we all? And that's the story. Who is he really? Is he Bruce or is he the Hulk? What does that mean? Or you know that Captain America, he's got the super soldier serum that makes him so big and strong to protect us and to lead the other Avengers. Important. Backstories, origin stories. They're really important. Sometimes they're otherworldly. not to cross comic book worlds, but you know that Superman can run faster than a speeding bullet and can leap over a building in a single bound because he's from planet Krypton. Or to go back to the Avengers, you know Thor is so strong with that big hammer because he's not from around these parts, he's from Asgard. Sometimes our heroes and these stories that we tell, they're reluctant. Maybe they're secluded or they're not really involved in our world until they have to be, right? Think of Wonder Woman coming from Paradise Island, or Black Panther out of Wakanda, or Aquaman, what's his story? I don't really know. But he's here, you can go see him. These backstories, they're important. There's my favorite comic book character, Batman. He's kind of just a normal guy. He doesn't really have superpowers. But he's from kind of this removed from the rest of the world kind of existence, right? He's in this elite, very rich family, and then his parents are killed, and he takes his resources and his anger and his righteous indignation and his sense for justice to become the Batman. Origin stories. They're really important. They help us see wider things that are going on and what the storyteller really wants us to know about the people and the events and how we are a part of that story. Now, the stories of the Gospels, Jesus is not a superhero. He's not a comic book character. He's for real. Lived in the real world. Lived among real people and real circumstances. And we would say lives here, still, among us. Each of the gospel writers wants us to know a little bit something different about who this Jesus is. We had this great little response in the beginning with the confession and with the dialogue. When John talks about Jesus, he talks about the Word becoming flesh, that this cosmic divine reality is in this person. And each of the stories that John will tell you about Jesus are about that. Or Matthew, he tells a different story than the manger and the shepherds and the angels. He tells a story about Joseph having this dream, not to get rid of Mary, but to hold tight to her, because you're going to have this son, and he's going to save the people. And then you hear this story of Jesus' lineage, which we usually gloss over because we're like, what's with all these names? But it's connecting you to the whole story. And then you have the great story of the wise men coming from the east, these foreigners that should have nothing to do with it at all, but they follow this star because they know something's going to happen. And then you have Herod, the local king, who finds out that somebody else is born to be king. We can't have that. Let's eliminate all the children. But Jesus escapes with Mary and with Joseph to Egypt, of all places, where the people were slaves years ago. And so when Jesus returns, he comes as the new Messiah to lead the people out of slavery into freedom. When Matthew tells us that story, that's what Jesus is all about for him. Mark doesn't quite have time for that. It's the good news, let's get going. But Luke, this story, it's something. It's the only story of Jesus as a kid that we have. And what is it about this story? So Mary and Joseph, they go down to Jerusalem every year for the festival, he tells us. These are good, practicing, faithful people. They show up for Christmas Eve service every year. They come. They come to the festival. And they don't come by themselves. We think of Christmas Eve and them getting to Bethlehem. It's just the two of them getting there. They come with family and with friends. We're told that they think Jesus is with the relatives. Think of that. They miss him because they think he's probably off with one of them until they realize he doesn't come home. And so they search for 3 days for him. 3 days. A long time. And then this interaction. How could you have done this to us? And where else would I be? But right here. The whole time. It's not about Jesus being in the temple for the story. It's about him always showing up in the least place that you'd expect. And this extraordinary revelation of God being in flesh to just ordinary people doing ordinary things, or the people that we would normally not deal with or forget about. I mean, Jesus goes to his hometown to preach in the synagogue. We're like, okay, he's in his father's house there. That makes sense. He says the day of the Lord is here. And it means good news. It means good news to the poor. It means freedom to the captives. It means the blind can see. It means those who can't walk will leap for joy. And it's going to happen right now. And they go to take him off the cliff, to throw him off the cliff and kill him. Where else would he be? But right there. Or Jesus likes to heal people, especially in Luke. You've got this great story that only Luke tells where the 10 lepers are gathered around them and he heals them. And they go off praising God, and one of them comes back to thank him. And he asks, well, where are the other 9? Well, where else would Jesus be? But right there, in the midst of that. And Jesus likes to eat. He's with people all the time and all the wrong characters. He's with his friends, Mary and Martha. He's with Zacchaeus, the tax collector, that scoundrel. I'm going to your house today. They share in this meal, and Zacchaeus has this revelation that what he'll do is he'll give away 4 times that which he's collected. Where else would Jesus be than a place like that when something amazing happens? Or these great stories that Jesus tells, but only he tells them in Luke. You know, the prodigal son and the good Samaritan and Lazarus and the rich man. Where else would Jesus be? But pushing the boundaries and expanding our horizons as to where God is at work in the world. It's only in Luke, when Jesus is dying on the cross, that there's this conversation that takes place with the others who are also dying there. The one says to him, well, if you're really the Messiah, save yourself and us. And the other one says, we're getting what we deserve. This man's done nothing wrong. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Now, where else would Jesus be but that place where he says, today you'll be with me in paradise? And the women, when they go to the tomb to try to find Jesus that Easter morning, and he's not there, and they go back to tell the others, and they dismiss it because they think it's just an idle tale. Where else would Jesus be? But he's on the road. He's with 2 people walking back home, thinking the story is over, and they're telling him all about it until they break the bread again, and they realize it's him. He's been with them the whole time. Where else would Jesus be? These origin stories, they're really important. Not just for superheroes, and not just for Jesus, and not just for the other stories that we know, but for us, too. I mean, how would you talk about your origin story? What would you include? Who would you include? What pieces form who you are, and where you are now, and where you've come from, and where God is continuing to pull you forward into the future? I mean, we're complicated human beings. I get that. It might not be so simple. I always think of 3, really, that kind of form me and the way I look at the world. So the first origin story that I think about my ancestors, particularly like my great-grandparents and my great-grandparents, because they're most of the people in my family line that came to the United States. They came from poor communities all across Europe. They didn't speak English. Some of them couldn't even read or write, but they had this hope for this kind of new life here. And I think of my grandparents, who I knew really well, who were part of that greatest generation, both serving abroad and at home during the Second World War, what that meant for them and our family, and ever since. And I think about, okay, now me, what does it mean for me to live in this country with so much opportunity and so much freedom, and at the same time so many struggles still among people who want to be a part of it? That's one origin story. Another origin story that I like to think about, and I know I've told you this before, is the street I grew up on, Morris Drive in Palatine, Illinois. It wasn't exactly this way, but it's always the way I remember it, is that we knew everybody on the block. And just about everybody on the block went to church, or at least they were connected somewhere even if they didn't go. And it was the kind of community back in those days where most people in that community were either Lutherans or Catholics. That was kind of the two options. And I like to tell the story of not wanting to kick my ball into Mr. Guthrie's yard because I had to sit next to him the next day, and I didn't want to have to deal with that. And I think of how we live now, where our families are scattered all over the place, where we live in a time and culture where people have all kinds of different values that are competing for our attention and for our affiliation. And I think of my own kids and their own friends and how they kind of struggle to put that together and what that might mean. And I think of, okay, so for us as a church, what does that look like? Not just as we look into the future, but being part of an institution that's crying out for adaptive change to bring this mission forward again. That Christ is with us always, no matter what, especially in these hard-to-look-at places. And then the other place I look to in my own backstory is the time I spent at camp, when I was just this young adult coming with all kinds of questions and doubts and uncertainties about the future and where I was going, and being part of a community that, first of all, cared and allowed me to ask those questions and was supportive and allowed me to lead and gain responsibility and think about the future and how God was part of that. And I remember just being in that place of thinking about, maybe I should be a pastor. That's weird. And wondering if I could do it and should I do it. And getting the support and encouragement of others to pursue that. And especially on those days, we all have them that are difficult. I go back to that question again and again. What's your backstory? What's your origin story? Who are the people that are really important that formed you? What are those circumstances that made you who you are? What is your way of looking at the world? I mean, Jesus has a wonderful way of always showing up in those places. That's what this origin story is about for me. Where else would you look for the Christ at Christmas besides the manger? Where else would you look for Jesus other than in the people whose lives of those who follow him? Where else would you look for Jesus than out in the world among the people that are hurting and longing for meaning and purpose in their own lives? Where else? Where else would he be? As we still gather around the manger this Christmas, as we look to the new year that is ahead of us, as we gather, as Paul says, to teach and admonish one another, to sing songs and psalms and spiritual songs, as we, like Mary, ponder these things and treasure them in our hearts, let us discern together, again, moving forward, where is this Jesus? Where do we see him? What might he be teaching us still? Capes and spidey senses optional. Amen.